People have been calling you intense your whole life. You weren't even trying. You were just paying attention to the conversation, to the tension in the room, to the thing nobody else seemed to notice. And somehow, that's too much. If you've heard, you take everything too seriously from more than one person, more than once, this is worth watching. Here's what the word intense usually means when people use it. It means your processing doesn't stop at the surface. It means you care in ways that make other people feel examined. And to people who've learned to coast through things, that looks threatening. That's not a flaw. That's a feature they don't have a manual for. Sign 1. They call it overthinking. You've probably heard that word pointed at you like it's a diagnosis. And here's the thing, they're not wrong about the effect. Your brain does run more loops. It does come back to things. It does find inconsistencies people walked right past. Polish psychiatrist Kazimierz Dabrowski spent decades studying individuals with what he called intellectual overexcitability, a neurological tendency to process information with more intensity, more recursion, more layers. He wasn't describing a disorder, he was describing architecture. Your brain wasn't designed to take things at face value. That's not a bug. That's the whole point. Sign 2. You walk into a meeting and know within minutes that something's off. Nobody said anything, nobody confirmed it, you just know. People have probably called this paranoia, reading too much into things. And honestly, the people around you do feel something when you operate this way. They can't name it. But there's a reason they keep reaching for words like paranoid or too sensitive, because your read on the room is often right, and that makes them uncomfortable. In the 1990s, Dr. Daughter Say, Elaine Aron, whose research on depth of processing has since been replicated across hundreds of studies, found that roughly 20% of the population has a nervous system wired to process sensory, emotional, and social information more deeply before responding. Not more emotionally, more thoroughly. You're not misreading the room. You're reading more of it than most people have access to. That's a different thing entirely. Sign 3. You've been called antisocial, hard to connect with, boring at parties. And in certain settings, that's accurate. You do disengage, you do go quiet, you do get a look on your face that people interpret as contempt. A 2012 study published in Psychological Science found that people with higher cognitive complexity who process information in layered, multi-dimensional ways consistently report lower satisfaction from surface-level conversation, not because they're antisocial, because small talk is the cognitive equivalent of running your engine in neutral. It's not that you don't want to connect, it's that you need the conversation to actually go somewhere, to build into something, to matter past the next 30 seconds. Your brain wasn't built to idle. Sign 4. People frame this as all or nothing thinking, a rigidity, a failure to modulate. And it has caused real problems. Projects you overcommitted to, relationships you ran at full intensity until one day you didn't. Psychologist Adrian Tellegen, whose research on absorption has been studied for decades, identified a measurable personality trait, the tendency to become fully, completely engaged in an experience to the exclusion of everything else. Not pathology, a cognitive style. High absorption individuals don't do partial attention. They don't do half-hearted effort. A colleague once asked someone wired like this why he'd left a job mid-project with no explanation. He paused for a moment, then said, "The day it stopped mattering, I couldn't pretend it still did." His colleague had never thought about it that way. Most people can perform investment they don't feel. You never learned how. That's not a flaw in your wiring. That's the wiring working exactly as intended. But here's the question worth sitting with before we go further. Is your intensity focus, or is it control? Because an intense brain can build extraordinary things. It can also lock you into patterns that keep real connection just outside your reach. The withdrawal that looks like discernment, the standards that function as walls, both look identical from the outside. Only you know which one it is. Sign 5. You've been told you go cold, that people can't tell if you're present or gone. And they feel that. That part is real. Research published in Psychological Science found that even a few seconds of unexpected silence triggers a measurable anxiety response in most people. They feel it not because they have something to say, but because quiet feels like something went wrong. You don't have that reflex. You're silent because you're actually inside something, processing, building. Not gone, just somewhere else. There's a word for the distinction between those two things. The word is depth. Most people haven't learned to see it from the outside. Sign 6. People have probably walked away from you without understanding why. One day you were present, then you weren't. No fight, no explanation, just gone. And from their side, that's confusing. Research published in the Journal of Personality found that high conscientiousness individuals, people with strong internal value frameworks, consistently apply the same standards to others that they hold themselves. 2. Not judgment, application. When someone violates a principle you live by, you don't process it as rudeness. You process it as incompatibility. You don't get angry. You just quietly recalibrate who gets access to you. That's not cruelty. That's having a definition of what you're building and protecting it. If you're a man carrying this, you've probably learned to compress it. Intensity reads as needy to people who don't have it, so you go quieter. You perform indifference until it stops being a performance. You train yourself out of it. That compression has a cost, not because intensity needs to be loud, but because intensity needs direction. And a directed man is a very different thing from an angry one. Intense brains aren't difficult. They're calibrated for things most people stopped looking at a long time ago. The problem was never the calibration. The problem was spending years in environments that had no use for it. The right environment doesn't fix you. It just finally makes sense of you. Which of these 6 signs hit closest to home? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. And if you know someone who spent their whole life being called too much without understanding why, send this to them. Sometimes just having the language changes something. If this is the first time someone put this into words for you, there's more where that came from.